Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is July the 27th, 2023. I'm Barry Stagner and very glad to be back with you this week. And please pardon last week's no show. And we just couldn't find a time or spot where we would have consistent connection, Wi Fi connection to do anything. Terry and I managed to do a little update from the ship in Alaska, and very encouraged by all the comments in response to that. But good to be back with you this week. And you'll have to pardon me. I picked up a little bit of a bug that I'm just on the tail end of while on the ship or plane or something. But you cram a bunch of people into a small space, and you're bound to pass some stuff around. So Terry's kind of in the throes of it right now. And so she'll follow. Seems to be the pattern that I had as well. But appreciate your prayers for the trip. It was amazing. We saw dozens of people give their lives to Christ. Huge interaction between the 940 people who were on board for the prophecy conference and the balance of the ship. And everybody was asking, who wasn't part of our group, what are all these people lining up for every day and waiting to get in the theater for? And so there are lots of opportunities for the passengers to share with those. And interestingly, the line for I think they call it the World Theater, the line passed through the casino uh, on the ship. And so people were interacting, and we heard lots of wonderful stories about engagements with people for the conference, answering questions of people who were wondering what on earth all these crazy people are doing here on this ship. And just a great time. And man, God's creative power was on majestic display in Alaska. And, we just over and over, we're just overwhelmed by the beauty and just the magnitude of Alaska in and of itself, and the whales we saw and all the other tremendous things we were able to do and see. It was just a great time. So thank you for all the prayers for the speakers. And by the way, next week, the lineup is going to be live, and you can join us in person if you're in the Southern California area. And interesting, I heard somebody actually said to me that, I didn't know until this cruise that you were a pastor. And because I never mentioned anything about the church or anything on the lineup, but obviously I was introduced as the pastor of what has for 23, almost 24 years now, I guess, 24 years now, been known as Calvary Chapel Tustin. We are changing our name as of this Sunday to Calvary Central OC, simply because we are in the city of Costa Mesa now rather than in Tustin where we were. And, the city actually tore down the whole street where our church was and rebuilt retail and condos and all kinds of stuff, part of a refurbishing of the old part of town, historic Tustin. And so anyway, that will be our name henceforth. And until the rapture, Calvary Chapel Central OC will be our registered name. We'll go by Calvary Central OC just to kind of eliminate the number of C's in our name. But anyway, this Sunday, we'll be switching gears, moving into our new sanctuary, which has been under construction for a year and a half. And also, again, next Thursday, Amir is going to be joining me in person for a live edition of the lineup at the church. So if you want to come and join us, that'd be great. It starts at 7 p.m. We'll have a time of worship. And then Amir and I are going to sit down and talk about some of the things going on in the nation of Israel. And interestingly, looking at all the things happening there, there's a lot of confusion both in the country and around the world about what exactly is going on there. And we've talked quite a bit about the necessity, I think, to bring everybody up to speed as to what all the hoopla is about and the marches in the streets and all that in Israel that we've been watching and following. And Amir's been keeping everyone updated on. Now, I wanted to kind of take an opportunity to clear up a little something that constantly pops up. It popped up again this week. I hear it all the time, and just wanted to maybe just inform everybody as to what the realities are regarding the issue of, this particular group wrote a song, and if a church sings a song, that entity gets money for it. And that question was emailed to me again this week, and I just happened to catch it yesterday, and I'll reply to the gentleman here pretty soon. And but I just thought, because this comes up so often, I wanted to address the reality of what happens. And listen, churches pay all churches should pay a copyright fee for singing songs that are written by other Christian or by Christian artists, and everybody pays this, or again should pay this fee, and but nobody turns in their song list to anybody. The only time anyone is paid royalties for a song that is sung is when somebody records a song and sells that. Nobody gets money for singing somebody else's song on Sunday during a church service. That's just not how it works. And so I hear this all the time about millions of dollars are being funneled to Hillsong and Bethel and all these other groups, who have some problems, and theologically, obviously. And that's just not so. That's not how it works. Our church pays a fee every year, a copyright fee, and every song you have to post, right at the bottom of the page in small as font as possible on the screens. Who wrote the song and all that, but that's the end of it. Nobody gets money from it, and nobody's being made rich off singing of anybody's particular song. So just kind of wanted to clear that up. If somebody records a song, sells that CD for money, or charges for an audience to come and hear their song, now that's a different story. People receive royalties for that. I've got a lot of friends that have written songs that they receive royalties for. I saw Richie Furay. Many of you, I'm sure, remember Richie, as he sang for Poco and Buffalo Springfield, a couple of older bands. For those of you who've been around a while like me, and he posted a picture one time of a royalty check he got for a penny, and so there is a tracking system for those who are out there re-recording songs written by somebody else and all that, but that's not the case with churches. Nobody gets any money when somebody sings your song during a church service. So just wanted to clear that up for everybody so you can maybe get a little bit better understanding about that. And, it just kind of popped in my head, so I'll throw this out there too, as long as we're on the subject. I get a lot of, emails about 501c corporations, that we have to bow to the government. That's not true. And we don't, the government doesn't tell us what we can say and all that stuff. A 501c3 is just simply a nonprofit organization, doesn't have to be a church. And, the Johnson Amendment of 1952, said that these entities cannot enforce or endorse rather political candidates as an entity, but any pastor can say who he personally is going to be supporting from the pulpit, and he can say it as many times as he wants. Granted, there's, I think, you can dedicate no more than 10% of your time to your position on any particular issue or whatever. But anyway, there are some rules, but you know what? Nobody's being told by the government, you can't do this, you can't do that. The purpose of a 501c is so you can get a tax write-off for your charitable donations. And it's intended to, although it's been exploited, obviously, by the Johnson Amendment, the whole point is to encourage charitable giving. And that's to any group. That's not just to churches. So anyway, thought I'd clear that up as well for those who have concerns about any church that's a 501c, which virtually all churches are. So anyway, off and running for our program tonight. We've got some interesting stories, kind of touching on a lot of bases as far as what's happening in the realm of Bible prophecy. But I wanted to start with something. Dr. Mark Hitchcock was one of the speakers from Faith Bible Church in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and gave a pair of wonderful messages. And he had some quotations that I thought were just really, really worth repeating. And I grabbed copies of them both. But one of them in particular, I thought, especially for those of you here in the States who are watching, and other countries as well, who are under what they call a democracy, which is simply majority rule, California. The United States is not a democracy, even though that's often pitched We are being told we are a democracy, and there's a reason for that. But we are a constitutional republic, and a constitutional republic focuses on individual liberty versus a democracy, which focuses on majority rule. So there's a huge difference. But we've been told over and over and over and over that these right wing efforts are to destroy our democracy and all these other nonsensical things. But anyway, listen to this. This is a Scottish history professor who wrote a book called The Fall of the Athenian Republic. And this was published in 1787. Now, listen to these words. Quote, a democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time, listen now, that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who will promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. End quote. Boy, prophetic words indeed. And we are seeing this happening all over the world where, democracy is in place in some form or fashion. And especially seeing this here in the United States. The UK is experiencing this, the Scottish professor's word of knowledge, so to speak. But, people will vote for what's personally beneficial to them instead of what's beneficial to the country. And just amazing times we live in. And we are unraveling at an unprecedented rate all over the world. And yet good things are happening. And I thought we'd start with a positive story this week because we've got some interesting things to talk about as we go through the program this evening. But the first is from the Christian Headlines. And the headline reads, 40,000 revival prayer groups rise up in Taiwan amid threats of war from China. More than 40,000 prayer groups in Taiwan have arisen amid the threats from China, and tensions are peaking. Beijing's belligerence is once again making Taipei jittery, a report from YN News said. According to CBN News, the Chinese military recently posted a video highlighting what simulated attacks on Taiwan would be like. And at present, Taiwan faces daily pressure from China as war appears to be imminent. To be clear, we do not seek conflict or confrontation, but we will not flinch in the face of bullying or coercion, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said. And Brian Liu, the pastor of the Shekinah House of Bread of Life in Taipei, told CBN News that Christians in Taiwan have come together to pray for their country. The united prayers and fasting prayers of the churches in Taiwan are much more than ever before. It is an unprecedented prayer movement, Liu shared with CBN News. I believe something so simple is starting to have such a huge impact upon people in the church and also people around the church, Gordon Huang, who pastors one of Taiwan's prominent congregations, added. Huang believes Taiwan is on the brink of a war with China and urged Christians to prepare. I think one thing for sure is that people are going to be so shaken and people will want to hear the gospel. Are you ready or are you going to be on the run yourself? Huang asked. Don Young, who served as an American ministry in West Africa for 15 years, shared with CBN that God prompted him in May of 2021 to launch a prayer movement in Taiwan known as the Revival Prayer Group, RPG. Is what it goes by. And I think that's kind of an interesting play on words. An RPG is a rocket-propelled grenade. And Pastor Chuck used to refer to prayer as a guided missile, that you could pray something specifically targeting the other side of the world. And because God is over all, that he can answer and send the answer to that prayer to a specific person or individual or need all the way on the other side of the world. And prayer is the only way that you can get through anything shaking, Young contended. Jesus said everything by prayer. He did nothing apart from prayer. Before it was just kind of a moment with God. We all have them, but now it's shaping up to become a movement for God. There's a huge difference between a moment and a movement. And because RPG has 2 or 3 people in a group, so if one day war happens and there are no physical buildings that people can meet in, we can still pray in small groups so that the church will not be affected, Pastor Lou added. And isn't it interesting how so many times we see difficulty bring people back to what should have been happening all along? But it's true for all of us. When a moment of difficulty or tragedy strikes, we turn to the Lord and cry out to Him as a present help in time of need. And we need to join these in prayer in Taiwan. The Christian church there is strong. And as you can see, they are moving in a direction where, the Romans 8:28 thing is in play for them, to where all things work together for good. And they're looking at, as that one pastor shared, you're just going to be running for your life, or you're going to be trying to reach others who are hungry for the gospel in a time of national tragedy. So again, no matter what's going on in the world around us, no matter what's happening in our country or your home country, wherever you may be around the world, God is there and He is answering prayer. And, we just saw this. I think there were 9 people from 9 countries on this Alaska cruise. I talked to one of the last conversations. I believe it may have been the last conversation I had on the ship was with a couple from Malaysia, and they were talking about things going on there and some of the things that we had discussed during the conference. They were concerned about, and is that going to happen here? And all these things that aberrant movements and things of that nature. But God is in control, and He is on the throne, and He's not going to be voted out. And it doesn't matter what's going on in the world. God is the authority over all creation, and He always will be. And so we can trust in and rely on and cling to Him, even when we're feeling like David did. There's one of the Psalms where David said, "God, why are you so far from helping me?" And basically what that translates to is, "Where are you?" And we all have felt that at times, but God is there, and He is always faithful, and He will never, ever let us down. So in the midst of all that we see going on in our world, and it's frustrating to watch the heinous things going on in our country, and especially California leading the charge and all that. It's just very frustrating, and you wonder how long, oh Lord. And we've got a guy who is the governor of the state of California that just is downright evil. I don't know how else to say it, and I don't know there's any other right way to say it. But he needs to be prayed for, not just about, and prayed that he comes to his senses and God saves his perishing soul and stops this slide of moral depravity here in the state of California. Now, Zero Hedge has our next article, and it says the details of its secret U.S.-Russia talks revealed as Ukraine counteroffensive is in bad shape. And new details have been revealed Wednesday related to the Ukraine war. At a moment, the West is beginning to admit Ukraine's counteroffensive is failing, despite billions of foreign military hardware and counting shipping to Kiev thus far. Secret diplomatic talks are ongoing between former senior U.S. national security officials and high-ranking members of the Kremlin. A U.S. official directly involved in the talks is confirmed to the Moscow Times, the Amsterdam-based publication reports. Now, the ongoing meetings have involved Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, representing Moscow, and were detailed as followed. Known as Track 1.5 diplomacy, these covert discussions enable both sides to understand each other's red lines and mitigate potential conflicts, serving as such a crucial link between official government negotiations, Track 1 diplomacy, and unofficial expert dialogues, Track 2. There's an imminent need for Track 1.5 diplomacy when the world gets closed off, as it has now, the U.S. official who is directly involved in the talks said. Further confirming twice-a-month meetings, but which are done sometimes online remotely. I have been visiting Moscow at least every 3 months, the diplomat told the Moscow Times. After, in the opening months of the war, direct attempts at Russia-Ukraine negotiations collapsed, reportedly thwarted by the U.S. and the U.K. At the moment, there was a guiding belief that Ukraine could push back the invasion. U.S.-Russia communications deteriorated to the point of becoming almost non-existent. However, there was a focus on the exchanges of prisoners, and in the case, as is the case of Brittany Grenner and Victor Bout, demonstrated, we were given some access to the Kremlin's thinking, though not as much as we would have liked. An attempt to isolate and cripple Russia to the point of humiliation or collapse would make negotiation almost impossible. We're already seeing this reticence from Moscow officials, he said, this individual who has been part of these negotiations. And his conclusion was Russian power is not necessarily a bad thing. The U.S. wants Russia with a strategic autonomy in order for the U.S. to advance diplomatic opportunities in Central Asia. And we in the U.S. have to recognize a total victory in Europe could harm our interest in other areas of the world. And again, just considering, all this money that we've been shipping over and resources we've been shipping over to Ukraine. And, people often point out the fact that, we've got thousands and thousands of veterans living on the street here in the country. And yet, we're shipping all this money and hardware, depleting our own ammunition resources, which was a story we covered a few weeks back, that the president made that announcement internationally that we're low on ammo, which is not a good thing to say, obviously. But in the midst of all that, behind the scenes, the U.S. has been, working to settle this particular issue. And, again, I think it's important for us to remember, Pastor Jack Hibbs put it so wonderfully one time we were at a conference together. The government is God's institution. Politics is the corruption of God's institution. Romans 13 makes it very clear. God has a role, a limited role for human government to play in the lives of its citizenry. And that role basically is to protect the good from evildoers. And, the good, of course, we know the Bible says there's none good, no, not one. So we're not talking about anybody good enough to go to heaven on their own merit. We're talking about people who are innocent in their behaviors as far as according to the law. And, we're told that the minister who serves the purposes of God does not bear the sword in vain. And so, punishing evildoers and all that is what God has ordained government to do. But politics now has overridden the role of government and become this corrupt system of behind the scenes negotiations and, shaking a guy's hand on one side of the aisle and then negotiating with somebody on the other side of the battle, as we see in this. But again, the U.S. looking out for interests broader than simply, not allowing Russia to advance its hold on this particular region of the world. So, but there's reasons for that, and we'll talk about more of those stories in a moment. The American Military News website reports that images show more military equipment gathered at the Wagner camp in Belarus. Military equipment and vehicles believed to belong to the private Wagner mercenary group continue to move to a site in the village of Tetzel, in eastern Belarus, that is believed to be a site where troops from Yevgeny Prigozhin's company have settled after its aborted mutiny in Russia last month. Images from the Planet Labs service published on July 25th show at least 750 pieces of equipment and trucks of different types near the tent camp in what used to be a former garrison for members of a Belarusian missile brigade. Since July 19th, the amount of equipment and cars has been building steadily and now includes a series of trucks, minibuses, vans, SUVs, regular cars, 33 buses of various types, 99 trucks, some with platforms and construction equipment on them, and armored vehicles used to transport military personnel. Now, the reason that this is important, I think, to draw our attention to is twofold. One, The Hill says UK lawmakers say Wagner Group is like an international criminal mafia. And the British Parliament warned that the mercenary organization, the Wagner Group, could pose a serious threat to the West in a report released on Wednesday. A key force in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the group has also worked throughout the Middle East and in Africa, often acting on behalf of Moscow, the report said. Even when the Wagner network has not acted as a direct proxy of the Russian government, the Kremlin is likely to have benefited from its presence. So long as the Wagner network survives in some form, we believe that countries may still, despite an apparent failure of Wagner to deliver on their commitments, turn to the network for security reasons, despite the high price, atrocities, corruption, and the plunder of natural resources. There are serious national security threats to the UK and its allies of allowing malign PMCs to continue to thrive, and not to mention devastating human consequences. Private military mercenary companies. Wagner, leading Yevgeny Prigozhin, turned on Russian military leadership in a short-lived coup last month. And after turning his troops from the front lines in Ukraine towards Moscow, Prigozhin struck a deal with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and sent his army there instead. In Belarus, Wagner troops have been reported training Belarusian military through, though it's unclear exactly how strong their numbers are after the mutiny. Now, the reason I think this is interesting, of course, the international threat and the mafia, these guys are fighting for money. They're paid mercenaries. They're mercs, as the term is often used, and they fight for money. They're guns for hire. And the interesting part about that is, if you consider what's going to be going on during the tribulation and the mass execution of those who accept Christ as Lord, one of the things that the Wagner Group has been known for, as the article mentioned, is their brutality. And I've made mention of this in the past, but those who are beheaded in the tribulation period for their failure to take the mark of the beast and their commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ and the testimony of his word, that they're going to not smoothly have their head taken from them via guillotine or, the Arabian saber type decapitation that, where you've got this big, huge, long, curved sword that I think many picture in their mind. But there's an implied brutality there with that word beheading, because it means to chop off with an axe. And, for a Merc group to be growing in power and authority, and they've already been conducting military operations in 7 different countries. And this group is growing, and that's why our first article was important to set up the second. This group is growing, and you never know what kind of implementation and instrumentation that the Antichrist is going to use to carry out his exploits. We do know that he is not going to worship the God of his fathers, but he is going to worship a God of fortresses. And fortresses is simply a term in Daniel Daniel chapter 11, that means military power. So, mercenaries, those who will do whatever they're asked to do for the sake of money, is not just happening now, but growing. And, thinking about the fact that there's a level of brutality, and some of the stories coming out of Ukraine are just hideous. Some of the things going on, with Ukrainian citizens and the women in particular, and the way that people have been killed and just simply executed. And so, when you recognize the fact that you've got a money-hungry society, a money-hungry world, and you've got a world that sees that, those who are opposed to the globalist mentality, and you've got a group also who are willing to do whatever will bring them resources. You've got a world that's primed for the coming of the Antichrist. But I'll remind you that the hindering force of the church via the Holy Spirit's indwelling has to be taken out of the way before this man can rise to power. And that's why I think these stories are so important, because we need to recognize we are at the door. And, any moment now we could have that twinkling of an eye experience where we're just instantly transported and meet the Lord in the air with the dead in Christ and are forever with the Lord. And that can happen at any time. And, I know the church always talks about the imminency of the rapture and that has no sign or precursor to it, and which is true. And that's why Paul expected the rapture. But listen, we're seeing things happen that are going to be fulfilled during the tribulation. And the pre-tribulation rapture is the only positional position, if you will, that timing position that makes any sense. And because after all, it is the 70th week of Daniel. And therefore, the 70 weeks have been carved out for Daniel's people in the holy city. And so we weren't here for the first 69 weeks. So we won't be here for the 70th week either. I mean, it's just that simple. We have to be taken out of the way. The church, that is, because one thing that is exclusive to the church is the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. You know, the Spirit comes upon us, the Spirit is with us, but it's only to the church that we're told the Spirit will be in us. So, in order for the preserving and purifying influence of the Holy Spirit to be taken out of the way, allowing then the rise of the Antichrist to power, we have to be gone. It is absolutely necessary that we, the church, are gone. It's a biblical necessity that we, the church, are gone. And so we'll be out of here before any of this goes down. But we're seeing things, again, precursors to them happening all around us that are making things that are unthinkable possible. And I think the Wagner Group is part of that. Now, we also know that, you know, the narrative has to be controlled by those in places of power in order for their agendas to be advanced. And the Gatestone Institute is reporting that the U.S. government's new, listen to this, a Ministry of Truth, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Mission creep is a serious problem, the article says, in the federal government, and the ongoing investigations by White House Republicans into weaponization of government misdeeds have shown how pervasive and deep the problem is. A new report by the House Judiciary Committee documents how the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has facilitated the censorship of Americans directly and through third-party intermediaries. The agency, under the administration of President Joe Biden and under the leadership of Jen Easterly, ramped up efforts to flag misinformation and disinformation on social media. The FBI, Justice Department, CIA, and even the IRS all look, as we have seen, like tempting operatives for use against political opponents or to run interference for allies. What about an agency that is supposed to protect us against cyber threats? A new interim report from the House Judiciary Committee highlights politically motivated mission creep, where we might at least have expected it, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. CISA, an agency of the Department of Homeland Security, was created in 2018 with a simple, non-political mission statement to prepare for, respond to, and mitigate the impact of cyber attacks. As reported here previously, CISA works to prevent state-sanctioned hackers from attacking and compromising America's digital infrastructure. The agency exists to warn companies and government entities of pending computer vulnerabilities. It also works to stop ransomware attacks on American companies and their computer networks and to minimize damage from cyber exploits by foreign and domestic sources. In short, CISA's mission brief was to watch out for attacks on our digital boxes and wires. Instead, as the House Judiciary Committee report documents, CISA has facilitated the censorship of Americans directly and through third-party intermediaries. This agency, under the Biden administration, ramped up efforts to flag misinformation and disinformation on social media, according to documents the committee obtained only through subpoena. And CISA considered the creation of an anti-misinformation rapid response team capable of physically deploying across the United States to stamp out what it would have constituted as misinformation. The agency went, for example, from ensuring the digital security of American voting systems to censoring criticisms of those systems. The internal communications of agency staff members of its outside advisory group show they knew they were on thin legal ground. And members of CISA's advisory committee agonized that it was only a matter of time before somebody realized we exist and started asking about our work. And indeed, that has now happened. The investigation has yielded the facts that media platforms like Facebook and Twitter were indeed who said they were determined to censor false and misleading claims about elections and other things of that nature. Were actually simply censoring anybody who supported the former president or had anything negative to say about vaccines or anything along those lines. And the article closes with how many more federal agencies are doing similar things. And isn't it an amazing thing that we have seen develop so quickly? And I always go back when we talk about the rapid advancement of these things to what Revelation 1:1 says, that John was told that he was going to be shown things that must shortly take place. And that doesn't mean that they're going to happen soon, but what that word translated as shortly means is to happen in quick succession. And once they start, they're going to happen rapid fire. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Things have changed dramatically in a matter of months and days. Things can be radically different than they used to be for centuries or even millennia. I mean, think about this whole gender thing and the breakdown of the nuclear family construction and all these other things that we're seeing that just boom, all of a sudden, I'm sure it's been in the works for some time behind the scenes. The devil's sure been working hard at it. But here we're watching things rapidly change. And remember that Jesus made the point that there was a birth pang-like progression that would be associated with the birth of the tribulation. And, late in labor, the birth pangs get more intense and closer together. And the phrase an increase in intensity and frequency has often been associated with the wars and rumors of wars, ethnic tensions, pestilence, and famines, and certainly seismological events. We got a closing story of interest regarding that last statement that we'll get to in a few moments. But in the UK, the Mirror reports that former defense official says the U.S. has recovered technology that, quote, did not originate on this earth, end quote. A former defense official has claimed that the U.S. has recovered technology that did not originate on Earth. The U.S. may have in our possession off-world technology recovered from someone else's space program, former intelligence chief Christopher Mellon said ahead of a hearing on UFOs in Congress this week. And I would ask, are we hearing a lot about UFOs of late? One of the witnesses to Congress, David Grush, a U.S. Air Force veteran and intelligence chief, says in June that the other nations have equipment of non-human origin to make weapons. He alleged information had been illegally withheld from Congress. He continued, the objective here, I think, and the opportunity is for the American people to come to a better understanding why it is that so many in Congress actually take seriously the idea that there are UFOs and UAP, unexplained aerial phenomenon, that are violating U.S. airspace, and the associated rumor allegation that we may have in our possession off-world technology recovered from someone else's space program. I've been told that we have recovered technology that did not originate on Earth by officials in the Department of Defense and by former intelligence officials. Officials dispute Mr. Mellon, who is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence to Presidents Bush and Clinton, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. An extensive report on UFO activity is due to be published in the summer, according to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, Director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And David Grush says the U.S. and other nations have equipment from non-human origin to make weapons, and he will testify before Congress at that hearing. And he explained to the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities earlier this year, despite the acknowledged UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, there's no evidence yet of any alien activity whatsoever. Over 650 cases of reported UFOs are categorized into common aircraft-like planes, but those that don't fit into these categories are marked by the location they are found. Are they attached to a national security? Excuse me, I'm sorry. Are they attached to a national security area? Does some show anomalous phenomenology that is of interest, Dr. Kirkpatrick said? On News Nation, Mr. Mellon said witnesses are in direct conflict with Dr. Kirkpatrick's version of events, and he called for an investigation by Congress. So there's a point to this, and let me follow this up with one more story, and I'll get to the point. American Military News reports non-human remains recovered from UFO, whistleblower says. An unidentified flying object, whistleblower, told the House Oversight Committee Wednesday that non-human biological remains have been recovered by the U.S. government from a previous UFO crash. According to YFF News, David Grush, who we mentioned in the previous article, who formerly served as a U.S. intelligence official, testified under oath concerning what he described as a multi-decade retrieval program for unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And Grush's, the UAPs again, Grush's testimony even included information about the retrieval of biologics from a UFO crash. During Wednesday's hearing, Representative Nancy Mace asked Grush if the U.S. government had recovered bodies of any of the pilots from UFO crashes. And Grush answered, I have stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Asked whether the biological recoveries were human or non-human, Grush said, non-human. And that was the assessment of the people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program. Now, again, I think this is important because one of the big questions that has come up and hear it pretty consistently is what's the world going to say after the rapture? How are they going to explain away the mass disappearance of Christians from all over the world? And, all of the sudden, this UFO issue, which has been kind of under the conspiracy theory banner and all of that. Now it's mainstream. It's just, there's stories every day about the legitimacy of these sightings and the fact that we're being visited. And, we hear stories about motherships on the other side of the moon, all kinds of stuff. But, this is being normalized. And that's kind of the method that has been adopted, through the rest of the things that we've been experiencing that now are just moving forward by leaps and bounds. It's just a normalization through the media and all these other things of events that are thinking that they want to force onto us and just get into our daily speak. And so, they're talking UFOs all the time. Now, is that actually going to be the explanation of why massive numbers of people have disappeared? I don't know, and I don't care if that is what they say. All I know is that someday we're going to meet the Lord in the air, and there's going to be billions of people, I believe, who wake up to the fact that they missed the rapture of their church. And I think a lot of those people will be ones who will refuse to take the mark. And then if you've got mercenary groups active on the planet already who are willing to kill for a buck, then, the Antichrist has a at-ready group already at hand to go to work for him, eliminating the opposition. And really, that's a lot of what this, the previous story about the cybersecurity and all that, they have to control the narrative. They cannot have a counter narrative out there, those who are wanting to advance socialism. And as we talked about at the top of the program, the democracy is always going to devolve into dictatorship. And that's proven that self to be true over and over and over. And again, we are a constitutional republic here in the U.S., but that's being overshadowed by the narrative. We're a democracy. We're a democracy. We're a democracy. Democracy means majority rules. The majority of people want this liberal ideology, and all that is what's being forced down our throat. And, the long suffering of God always comes to mind when we see these ridiculous things going on in our world that are just beyond understanding. It's just irrational. All the things that are being forced down our throats and poised as, or presented rather, as just normal. The UPI says the Kremlin says it won't rejoin the grain deal. United Press International. Ukraine alleges deliberate plan to tank the pact. The Russian government said Tuesday it was impossible for it to return to a deal allowing for the free shipment of grain from Ukraine amid the war. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, responding to comments by the United Nations Security General Antonio Guterres, criticizing Moscow's withdrawal from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, repeated assertions that the terms of the deal related to the export of Russian products were not being properly fulfilled. Indeed, Mr. Guterres' letter once again outlined a certain plan of action and a promise that one day it would be possible to fulfill the Russian part of these agreements, he said. Unfortunately, at the moment, It is impossible to return to this deal because it is not being implemented. Peskov said President Vladimir Putin has made it clear that Russia is ready to immediately resume the deal as soon as it is executed. Guterres said Monday that the termination of the grain deal would have far-reaching consequences under which the most vulnerable will pay the highest price, as he urged Russia to return to the agreement. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the grain deal contains obligations regarding the export of Russian products that has not been fulfilled. And the Russian government withdrew from the initiative on July 17th and has since launched a series of sustained strikes on Ukrainian ports and grain storage facilities that have destroyed a total of 60,000 tons of grain that were slated for export, according to Ukrainian officials. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main intelligence department, the GUR, said Tuesday it obtained a document stating that Russia took actions, including targeting Ukrainian port infrastructure, as a part of the single pre-development plan to disrupt the agreement. The Ukrainian government says it obtained a document proving Russia is deliberately trying to attack Ukrainian grain exports. And in general, the text of the document is devoted to the techniques that were employed to impede the implementation of the grain initiative and ultimately led to the termination of the agreement. And according to the GUR, Russia was able to effectively retain the ships heading to Ukraine ports, significantly limiting the volume of food exports from Ukraine, which in general prevented Kiev from exporting about 20 million tons of cargo. Now, again, remember, one of the things that we talked about early on after the Russian invasion of Ukraine was the role that these two nations play in feeding that portion of the world, often referred to as the breadbasket of Europe. You know, this is where much of the grain exports that are coming out of both of these countries are headed. And again, you know, if you think about the riders of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, a famine is clearly indicated there that drives the food prices up to a day's pay for a single meal if you buy wheat, and 3 meals for a day's pay and a single person um, food supply for a day's pay as well. It's just interesting to see that these two products keep making their way back into the news. And again, you know, precursors to the tribulation, certainly possible and definitely probable, I would say, at this point in time, with all the other things we see going on in the world. So again, you know, when we see these types of things happen, and we see, you know, there's been a kind of like with the Ezekiel war scenario, you know, we see things kind of shake up a little bit. We've seen the fact that Sheba and Dedan, or Saudi Arabia, you know, have made overtures with Israel. There's been a friendship developed there. Some diplomatic ties have been established, and you know, agreements and visitations and all these other things. And yet, you know, the whole issue going on now in Jenin has caused a bit of rift, but that doesn't change Bible prophecy. It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter if things ebb and flow, or if they, you know, advance rapidly and then pause for a moment. The things the Bible says are going to happen are going to happen. And what we have to remember about the book of Revelation in particular is, you know, these aren't predictions. These are history stated in advance. That's what prophecy is. You know, God sits on high. He knows the end from the beginning. And what's going to happen, he sees with the same clarity as he can view the past. And he knows exactly what's coming. And he's revealed it to John while on the island of Patmos. And John recorded what's going to happen in the future. So since it's in, you know, we might even say in God's eyes, it's already happened because he's already seen it. And he's already told John, don't predict these things. He said, write them down because this is going to come to pass. And so no matter what's happening, no matter whether things move forward or backwards or sideways or pause, the Bible's prophecies are going to happen exactly as written. And this plays into the fact that under the riders of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and when that rider on the third horse goes out, it's going to be a day's pay for one meal for one person if you buy wheat. A quart of wheat for a denarius is the language that is used there. There are 3 quarts of barley. You know, barley is the cheaper grain. It's the bread of the poor, the food of the poor. but it's still just for one person. You're going to have to work all day just to feed one meal to one person or three meals to one person during the tribulation. And what's the example that's used? Grain. And so this is no small thing to see Russia, taking this particular posture. And while the motivation for them, might be protecting their own exports and not wanting, Ukraine to feed their economy, certainly, to push things in their favor, by having, hunger be the motivation for those who cannot receive the products that come from these grains being shipped into Europe and elsewhere. But just again, incredible time for us to be alive. And let me just move to our last story. I wanted to get to this because it's just an area of interest to me. And long time I've been following a website that tracks disastrous events around the world, and including things like Earth approaching objects and mass deaths of animals and things along those lines. And also, it has a section on supervolcanoes. And, there's some 25 supervolcanoes around the world. And a supervolcano is different from the cone-shaped volcanoes that we see and observe, like Mount St. Helens and others. And a supervolcano, the body of the volcano is underground. And the caldera, or the mouth of the volcano, is on the surface. And the largest caldera of a supervolcano is actually in California, Mammoth Mountain. And it's a 20-mile wide mouth to this volcano. And there's another supervolcano in Yellowstone. We often hear about that erupting. And there's one in New Mexico. There's several all over the United States. But just tracking and watching these and how many of them have become active that haven't erupted in recent history is very, very concerning, because we do know there's going to be these cataclysmic events that take place during the tribulation. And I thought this was an interesting story. And this isn't about a supervolcano, but it is about a volcano. And it comes from Watchers magazine. And the headline reads, Magma Intrusion at Trident Volcano. And here's why this is interesting. This is a site of the world's largest eruption in the 20th century. Alaska's Trident Volcano has seen a significant increase in seismic activity and ground uplift over the last 5 months, leading to concerns about a potential volcanic eruption. The Alaska Volcano Observatory, or AVO, has confirmed that this unrest is a result of magma intrusion beneath the volcano. The rising magma, which can trigger an eruption, has also caused increased seismic activity in neighboring volcanoes of the Katmai volcanic cluster, including Katmai, Martin, Magik, and Novarupta, the Novarupta vent. The world's largest eruption of the 20th century occurred in June of 1912 near the base of the Trident volcano. The recent unrest started in August of 2022, with an unusual series of earthquakes migrating progressively from depths of about 16 miles below sea level to shallower depths of approximately 3 miles. The earthquake activity has fluctuated since then, prompting the AVO to alternately raise and lower the volcano alert level and aviation color code. By February of 2023, the persistent seismicity, led the AVO to upgrade the alert to advisory and the aviation color code to yellow. And from May 2023, AVO detected a marked increase in low-frequency earthquakes in the region between Trident and Novarupta, often indicating of magma or magmatic fluid movement within the Earth's crust. Concurrently, satellite data indicated ground uplift at the Trident volcano, with an estimated uplift of about 5 centimeters or 2 inches since October of 22 on the volcano's south flank. Although the current signs point towards magma moving upwards, it's important to note that such activity doesn't always result in an eruption. Sometimes the seismic activity and ground uplift can cease without an eruption, or the unrest could persist for months or years before an eruption occurs. Now, if an eruption occurs, the primary hazards would be volcanic ashfall, drifting ash clouds, which could disrupt air and marine travel and impact local communities and infrastructure. And the areas impacted would largely depend on the wind direction during the eruption. Closer to the eruption site, additional hazards such as ballistics or pyroclastic flows could occur. And the last eruption of this volcano started on July 15th, 1974, and lasted about 45 days. And the largest eruption of the 20th century occurred in June 1912 at the Trident Volcano. And again, the eruption was accompanied by many earthquakes, including 14 ranging from magnitude 6 to 7, which released 250 times more seismic energy than the 1991 caldera-forming eruption of Pinatubo volcano in the Philippines. So again, you've got these combination of factors going on in our world today. You've got the polarization of mankind into the two groups, the left and the right, happening all around the world. You've got people, who see the other as such a great enemy because they don't think like them, that they think the planet would be better off without them. You've got, all these things happening with Ukraine and Russia and the grain shipments. And, the article we read just a moment ago said, it's the people in most need that are going to be impacted by this, the quickest and the worst. And then here you've got the potential eruption with the ash cloud and all these other things that interrupt air travel. And, the world is going to be a mess during the tribulation period, and all these events that will be happening and the catastrophic things that God has foretold are coming upon the earth, many of which he institutes, some of which are just, the consequential wrath of God as people are butchering each other and all of that, as a godless and lawless society would do. And all of that tells us that the Lord is coming for us soon. And I think soon has a different meaning than it used to. We should always live in expectation when we get up in the morning that this could be the day of the rapture, and live with that desperation for the lost and perishing around us, because we know about the things that are coming upon the whole world, and that it's going to be so intense that if the Lord himself didn't come back and stop it, but he will for the elect's sake, that no flesh would survive. So we're seeing kind of the pulse of these things happening in our world today. So let's make sure we're telling people about the Lord and how to escape the things that are coming upon the whole world. Well, that's all we have for this week. So again, thank you for your patience and skipping a week, and pray that you, maybe if you're in the area, come and join us. Come sit with us in the sanctuary. And Zamir and I sit down next Thursday night, 7 p.m. right here on the lineup, and discuss things going on in Israel. I think you'll find it to be a very informative time. When Amir asked me what I wanted to do for the evening, I told him I want you to help us understand what's going on in Israel. He got very excited, and we'll of course have many, many things for us to glean from him. So next Sunday night at Calvary Central OC, formerly known as Calvary Chapel Tustin, and you can go to our website at cctustin.org and get directions, and come and join us, or jump on here online like always, and we'll see you there online. But anyway, thanks again for the prayers. Great conference, great cruise, wonderful time with the saints. Met so many wonderful people, and thank you for all who shared, that you watch the lineup every week or often, and so appreciate that. And just great to get to shake hands with so many of you. So that's it for this week, and you know the drill. I'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.